Communication is like anything in life. You're much more likely to do it well if you actually know what you're doing. And that means being aware of the strengths and weaknesses of every potential moment of your communication task. What do you have to do, and what are the tools you're going to use to do it? If what you have to do is to communicate something, you have to know what the potential is in every kind of communication that you're going to engage in. And here it helps to be aware. So communication context, you have to know your role. Are you speaking, how many people are you speaking to? What are the stakes? What's the content of what you're trying to say? What are you actually trying to communicate? This breaks down into a simple understanding of the different modes: where, how, and to whom. There's interpersonal communication, small group communication, and presentational communication. We can boil the different capacities down, or the different potentials down, into those three categories. Interpersonal communication. This is the most common, probably. This is when two people interact, influencing one another simultaneously. This is essentially a common conversation and is often predicated on that personal relationship management. The advantages of it is that it gives maximum feedback, with people communicating non-verbally, nodding along, interjecting questions, saying, I don't really get it, what are you trying to say? Or you can even just read visual cues of someone's furrowed brow and correct. Tactical modulation. Just decide in the middle of speaking to someone that they're not quite getting it, you can change course and say, well, let me take another stab at this. Why don't we try this example instead of that one, so you can get an understanding. This works very well, but it is essentially one person at a time. So it's not necessarily good for mass communication, but it's very effective for dealing with one person individually. Going to small group communication. This is a small cohort of shared purpose. You see this an awful lot in teams within any organization. This allows an ability to influence one another's emission and reception strategies. You can speak up and ask a question. It's much more welcoming a format for that. There's a greater potential for a speaker to be able to sense when that group isn't quite following along with what you're trying to say, so they can correct. But it is a more public forum, so you can get greater dissemination of the message, greater scope of messaging. But because it is not that intimacy, you get greater potential for misinterpretation. People will, in a group, start to feel bad, like, oh, if I'm the only one not getting this, I'll feel bad, so I'll just stay quiet. And very frequently, people will be inhibited from asking questions, even in small groups. In a presentational format, presentational communication is a public role. So you get a speaker audience model. Usually this is used to inform, persuade, or entertain. You get maximum scope for messaging. You get limited scope, however, in perspective. There is just one person speaking very frequently, and everybody else is supposed to sit quietly. This works very well in a public assembly where you see somebody on stage and they're giving a speech of some sort. This works very well in electronic media, in broadcasting of all forms, where we are expressing something with no real sense of how it is being received. There are few opportunities for constructive feedback. In a live audience, maybe they can set up a microphone and invite questions, but then that person has to have the courage to stand up in front of all of his or her colleagues and say, well, I don't really understand this. And there is a very human hesitation about that sort of honesty. So you have to be aware of that. There is a sense that you're not going to get an accurate read on how your message is getting through. This demands communication consciousness. Number one, know what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to accomplish something on a small scale or a large scale? Are you trying to deal with a fairly personal issue, or are you trying to deal with a fairly organizational issue? These are very critical. This is critical information to knowing how to accomplish your task. What sort of scope do you need to give your message? Number two, know the potentials of each model. If it is an interpersonal communication, if you have a personal issue, even in a workplace, pulling that person aside and speaking to them one-on-one is usually quite effective. You create little moments of intimacy sometimes. If you have to call them into your office, let's say, and close the door, and you sit down, let's say, not even across the desk, but in chairs side by side, so it's a little bit more intimate. These all communicate, these venues all communicate a kind of personal contact that can go a long way in what you're trying to accomplish. With this, however, know the limitations of each model. That personal touch is ineffective if you're trying to have wide-scale dissemination of information. You cannot get that kind of spread if you're going to be talking to people one person at a time. And again, in a business format, if you're going to have a broad-scale change in, let's say, the way you're doing business, or something more simple, like, okay, we're going to change the healthcare plan in our company. Sometimes the one-on-one is not very effective because it takes a lot of time to get through everyone. But the limitations of doing that on a personal basis does come with a cost. So you go to a larger scale thing, but understand that that has the opportunity for or less opportunity for feedback, and less opportunity for that sense of we're all on the same team. And if it is something like, okay, I gathered everyone here today to tell you that our organization is changing our health benefit package, then great. You have to anticipate that your message is going to be received, tolerated, and then will be discussed after the fact. And you're going to get a lot of griping, and you're going to get a lot of complaints that you won't necessarily hear because you were just disseminating the information, and you're not doing so in a format that is conducive to getting that feedback individually. You have to anticipate failures and shortcomings. This is key. Nothing is perfect. It does not work to just tell everybody something, assume they all got it perfectly, and then sit down and say, well, I'm done. You have to assume that every communicative act is subject to error, subject to failures, subject to simple human complication in understanding. Anticipate that. Expect that it will happen. Statistically, it's almost guaranteed. But when approaching these moments, when approaching these challenges, when approaching these communication acts that you are called upon to do, all you can really expect is to speak deliberately. Speak deliberately. Think about what you're going to say. That's the key. Think about the context, think about the forum, think about how to best package your message for the audience in front of you, whether that audience is one person, 1,000, 1,000,000. Think very deeply about how you say something. That's what we do in this class. We are going to learn to speak deliberately. This isn't about conversation or on a social interaction in any form. This is about making the points you want to make in the manner that prioritizes effectiveness. This is about communicating in a professional setting in a way that furthers your professional goals. This is about getting your perspective across.